Hello, dear ones, and welcome to music lovers, poetry lovers, those who love to worship the Lord with music and song, and those who have an interest in music history and music theory. My name is Christopher Watson, and today I'd like to look at one of the most popular hymns of all time and some of the sad and human stories that surround it. I'd also like to take a look at the beautiful hymn tune associated with this hymn text by the great hymn composer William Henry Monk. As usual, I want to apologise for not being a more knowledgeable scholar or a more skilled singer or musician. Please forgive my many limitations. Let's start with an older tune in the hymn meter of 10-10-10-10. That old tune, rather unceremoniously known as Song 24 by Orlando Gibbons, a close contemporary of William Shakespeare, is in 10-10-10-10. That's the hymn meter. Many of Gibbons' tunes are still in hymn books, and many of his tunes, or songs in fact, as not all his tunes were sacred music at the time, though many were written in that verse meter. This should be no surprise, given the time he was writing, as 10-10-10-10 in the hymn book is of course iambic pentameter, the most English of all poetic rhythms, in wide use by Shakespeare and his contemporaries. It was devised by the first true giant of English literature, Geoffrey Chaucer. However, by the mid-19th century, the period in which today's hymn was written, 10-10-10-10, that's 4 lines of 10 syllables, had become a far less common meter, and many of the tunes that could be used to sing those hymns were rather old. So in a way, this is a story about a missing tune. When I was looking into this hymn and its tune, I read a story that composer William Henry Monk had once heard a beautiful poem read at a poetry recital, written from the point of view of one close to death, including such delicate lines as "Swift to its close ebbs out life's little day, earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away." Learning that the author had indeed died shortly after having written this poem, and that it lacked a suitable tune, W.H. Monk immediately set out to write one. That story is not true. There was no poetry recital. Instead, the decision to write a tune for this poem and the composing of the tune itself happened at a committee meeting. But despite this uninspiring setting, the truth behind both the text and the tune are far more moving. The hymn, of course, is Abide With Me, and the tune is called Eventide. But before we get to the human story, let's start with some dry facts. Henry Francis Lyte, who wrote the poem, or hymn, was born in 1793 in Kelso, Scotland, and died, aged 54, in November 1847 in Nice, France, from influenza and dysentery brought on by his underlying tuberculosis. Henry Lyte had married Anne Falkland in 1818. He served in Lower Brixham in Devon, close to the sea. Served as a minister, that is. They had 6 children. In Devon, not long before his death, in poor health, he wrote the poem that would become Abide With Me, gave his last sermon, and travelled to the continent, hoping to ease his failing health. But there he died. A book of his poems and sermons entitled Remains of the Late Henry Francis Lyte, was edited and published in 1850 by his eldest daughter, also called Anne. Anne Maxwell Monckton Lyte, by then Mrs. Hogg. She signed herself AMMH. The poem, Abide With Me, was soon adopted as a hymn tune in some smaller hymnals. The earliest I could find was Hymns for the Church of Christ from 1853, which included 3 verses of the poem. The poem has 9 stanzas. If you're not familiar with the terms, hymns and songs have verses, poems have stanzas. Those are kind of synonyms. It was suggested as a text for the first edition of the great hymn book, Hymns Ancient and Modern, planning for which had begun in earnest in 1859. The hymn book was published in 1861. But there was no tune. There was no tune really that suited the text adequately. So William Henry Monk wrote one, reportedly in a few minutes at one of the committee meetings. Hymns Ancient and Modern became extremely popular and essentially set the standard for many, many hymn books to come. And the hymn Abide With Me also became popular with Monk's musical setting. Just for fun, let's hear another piece of Orlando Gibbons in the same poetic metre. That was another simple tune in 10-10-10-10 by Orlando Gibbons called Song 22. Perhaps they had tried the text with some of these well-known tunes before W.H. Monk decided it needed one written for it. As for William Henry Monk, W.H. Monk, let's list some facts. At the committee meeting were present the Reverend Sir Henry William Baker. He is a very, very famous hymn text writer. We will definitely come across him. The Reverend Francis Henry Murray, the secretary and co-originator of the idea. William Denton, the co-originator of the idea of Hymns Ancient and Modern with Francis Murray. And the Reverend William Henry Monk, musical editor and then organist of St. Matthias, Stoke Newington. There were also a few assisting clergy and musicians. The first edition contained modern tunes, including those written by Monk and Dykes, another famous hymn tune writer that we will look at later, as well as what they called ancient material, and by which they meant music going back to the Renaissance and medieval period. They discussed pairings of hymns and tunes and agreed that Abide With Me ought to have a better tune. The book, The Remains of the Late Henry Lyte, from which the text comes, brings some of these facts to life. Lyte's daughter Anne, who signed herself as AMMH, Anne Maxwell Monckton Hogg, but otherwise simply refers to herself as the editor, had by the time of publication also lost her mother. She writes the following in the preface to the book. The unfinished manuscript passed into the hands of his second son, who inherited much of his father's taste for literature, and would have ably carried out the design had he not been very shortly summoned to follow his father into the world unseen. So she had also lost one of her 2 brothers, Henry Maxwell Lyte, and a few years later, the other brother would also die. The book has a long, understated preface by Anne, some later poems, and what are called some earlier poems, as well as some of Henry Lyte's sermons. One of the poems is a long poem about the Battle of Salamanca, and there's a very nice one about Mary Magdalene, describing how she stayed near Christ on the day he was killed and imagining her feelings on that day. On page 18, there's a charming poem that Henry Francis Lyte wrote to Anne. Probably. She's not named, but the dates fit with how old she would have been then. It's called A Recall to My Child. Here are some snippets. Come back, my blessed child. Come home, my own light-hearted. Papa, they say, has rarely smiled since from his side you parted. Come back, the city's flaunting crowd, the concert's formal measures, the din of fashion false and loud, are not like nature's pleasures. Each, all in your loved converse miss, some wanted source of pleasure. From look or tone or smile or kiss, come home, my treasure. That would make a very good folk song. Modern readers might find him a bit of a clingy dad, but I think it's very sweet. Henry Lyte was a high Anglican, and like many Anglicans at this time, he was a little worried about heresy. Anne explains as follows, talking about his parishioners and the people of the region. They had not been trained to love and to confide in their spiritual mother, the bride of Christ. And therefore, when other claimants to their regard arose, they were easily led captive, and not only forsook the home of their spiritual childhood, but as the false spirit of antinomianism spread and strengthened, the faithful minister saw many whom he himself had trained as lambs of Christ's flock range themselves foremost in the ranks of schism, hostility, and even wild fanaticism. The spiritual mother, the bride of Christ, is of course the church, and I think Henry Lyte is perhaps overreacting a little here, but this was a time when a lot of what they called dissenting sects were appearing, including some that we regard highly, such as the Methodists. The term antinomianism comes from Greek antinomos, meaning against the law. It's not a heresy from Roman times, though, but one that was perceived to have arisen in the modern era. Loosely speaking, it describes a doctrine that once saved by grace, Christians are no longer bound by the law, which is fine. St. Paul said that, but the fear was that the antinomianists believed that feeling saved was more important than holy living, and that moral looseness might arise under the guise of freedom in Christ, and that an emotional experience was more important than disciplined faith. In his last sermon, Henry Lyte addressed this and addressed the topic of sin. I think he was worried that people that he felt had fallen into antinomianism felt that they no longer had to worry about whether they sinned. So in his last sermon, Henry Lyte addressed the topic of sin quite eloquently, I think. He says, "Nor was it the Jews or the Gentiles that in reality slew him, nor the spear nor the nails that wounded and pierced him, but the sins of his creatures." There's also a stanza in the poem Abide With Me that describes the believer's struggles with sin. So let's turn to page 19 and look at the poem. It has a line from Luke's Gospel as an epigraph. "Abide with us, for it is towards evening and the day is spent." That's from Luke 24, verse 29. So that's where the concept of eventide comes from. This gospel passage recounts when Christ encountered the disciples after his resurrection, but they didn't recognize him. Here's the whole text. "Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me." Eventide is an old Middle English word. Henry Francis Lyte had a good education. This next verse is perhaps my favourite. The language is so delicate. Swift to its close ebbs out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see. Oh, thou that changest not, abide with me. Not a brief glance I beg, a passing word, but as thou dwell'st with thy disciples, Lord, familiar, condescending, patient, free, come not to sojourn, but abide with me. Come not in terrors as the King of Kings, but kind and good with healing in thy wings. Tears for all woes, a heart for every plea. Come, friend of sinners, and thus bide with me. This next verse is about his feelings of being a sinner. Thou on my head in early youth didst smile, and though rebellious and perverse meanwhile, thou hast not left me oft as I left thee. On to the close, O Lord, abide with me. I need thy presence every passing hour. What but thy grace can foil the tempter's power? Who like thyself my guide and stay can be? Through cloud and sunshine, oh, abide with me. I fear no foe with thee at hand to bless. Ills have no weight, and tears no bitterness. Where is death's sting? Where, grave, thy victory? I triumph still, if thou abide with me. Hold then thy cross before my closing eyes. Shine through the gloom and point me to the skies. Heaven's morning breaks and earth's vain shadows flee. In life and death, O Lord, abide with me. That was written at Berryhead in September 1847, and he died in November. Anne was with Henry when he died. She describes it. Within 3 days of his first seizure, his medical attendants had given up all hope of his recovery and announced that death was very near. Yet for days he lingered, and his hour of release came not. But through the long days and weary nights of an almost living death, his patience, fortitude, and cheerfulness never forsook him. No word of complaint or impatience ever passed his lips, but as he lay there, dying in a distant land, life slowly ebbing away, the pallor of wasting sickness cast all over him, he would tenderly and gratefully mark each comfort which affection and solicitude provided. It's a lovely book, the preparation of which was an act of love by a daughter towards her father. Finally, on page 205, there's another daughter in another poem. This poem is entitled AMML, and the AM is Anna Maria. A few brief moons, the babe who slumbers here smiled on her parents, and that innocent smile was daylight to their eyes. They thought her fair and gentle and intelligent, and dared to lean their hearts upon her. Her very helplessness endeared her to them, and made her more their own. But this is done. The wintry wind passed o'er the opening flower, and nipped it in the bud, and it is gone. Sweet Spirit, draw the souls of those who love thee to the place where thou art gone before them. Make them feel that earth is not their home. Oh, fix their thoughts on heaven, on him who once on earth took up babes such as thou, and blessed them, and bade all who looked for heaven become like babes, like thee, pure, innocent, lowly, loving, and newborn. This is what's called one of the early poems. Henry and Anne had a daughter, Anna Maria, who died when she was a few months old. This is a sad poem, but beautiful and filled with heavenly hope. And the reference to Christ's instruction that Christians should be born again, like little children, is inspired and beautifully expressed. I don't know if William Henry Monk had previously read that poem about the death of Anna Maria Lyte, but I think it's very likely that he had. After all, they were both Anglican clergy, which was not a huge community. I mean, how many people would the Anglican Church have employed in those days? At most a few thousand. The Remains was a well-presented book, which included a hymn poem that had become popular. By a hymn writer, Monk would have known, because Lyte had written 2 other popular hymns, including Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven. And in fact, it's very likely not only that W.H. Monk had read the book, but that he had met Henry Lyte. They were both active in the High Church. Monk's wife, Hope Pillow, was from Devon and Cornwall, which is where Henry Lyte was serving. Monk was a liturgical scholar. Remains was sympathetically reviewed. And Monk had lost his own infant daughter in the years between Henry Lyte's death and the publication of the Remains, and was highly sensitive to devotional writing. There's a good website called londonoverlooked.com that describes that it was in Gresham College on a foggy Wednesday in April 1852 that little Florence died. That was William and Hope Monk's daughter. Monk was present and was a witness to the death certificate. She died after a long cerebral illness. W.H. Monk and Hope had 2 other daughters, by the way, one of whom may have been given the middle name Hope Still. W.H. Monk's wife was Hope Isadora Pillow. Pillow was her maiden name, which is related to, it's one of those old medieval trade names for where people got the name associated with the job they did. And a pillow was someone who made fur-lined cloaks. If you think of the Hussars Police, those words are related. So on the night he wrote Eventide, there was a committee meeting. Presumably the committee had discussed the lack of a suitable tune for Abide With Me, and it's reported by the London Observer that Monk's mind turned to the setting sun and the words of the hymn, and he penciled the tune Eventide. Perhaps he did indeed look out into the twilight. Anyway, he improvised, composed, and wrote down the tune, and they say the whole process only took about 10 minutes. Clearly, W.H. Monk was an excellent improviser. He had had years of experience as an organist, and the feeling of that moment, perhaps, that exquisite, delicate, refined text, produced one of the most perfect, heartfelt, and emotionally honest tunes in all of hymn writing. It's a perfectly balanced melody, understated but extremely creative harmonization, full of gentle dissonances that hint at sorrow, and it resolves to a profound repose. The melody's very even. It has a lot of these slow descending passages. Sometimes it'll leap and then slowly descend. And when there are leaps, for example here, it's a leap of a fifth. So very even. It's not striking or certainly not difficult to sing. A very smooth leap. And sometimes rising passages. So for example here, but very rising very slowly and descending slowly, and it's very balanced. The four phrases balance each other very perfectly. And that combination of these short rising passages, the slowly descending passages, occasional very unremarkable leaps, give this smooth, soft rise and fall. The cadences are quite veiled in the sense that there are perfect cadences and so on in here. Perfect cadence is that really final cadence, but they're often voiced in such a way that it doesn't sound like a strong closing chord. For example, here, the B7 over the D, so the different bass note. It doesn't finish on an E in the top voice, so it's just a very soft version of a perfect cadence. There was a little bit of pedantic criticism of this tune when it came out. One musical purist, writing in 1865, said, "We find in bar 3 a double minor seventh, in bar 5 an unresolved fourth six, in bar 7 a minor seventh resolving upward, in bar 11 a revival of the ill-sounding discord of a major third and a minor sixth. In bar 13, a strain commencing on a discord, and throughout the tune, whenever a discord will stick, there will such be found." That's by Stephen Georgeson Hatherby, who wrote a book on Byzantine music. So his taste in music was clearly old, and for that very perfectly balanced medieval music. His criticisms are interesting because he does point out some very beautiful features of the song. So he says a double minor seventh. Well, here we are. Here's the double minor seventh. So it's got the seventh is it's a minor, it's C minor, C and E, and it's got a B flat here and a B flat here. So that's the double minor seventh. I don't recall that being a forbidden interval. The seventh is usually expected to resolve in some way, and this seventh resolves, but this one just sort of stays where it is. He talks about in bar 5, an unresolved fourth six, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here, this passage here. It is a slightly unresolved chord. Usually what will happen is the B flat will remain and the other voices will resolve. So here you're going from they would have called this a B flat 6/4. We call it an E flat over B flat, resolving to a B flat, resolving to an E flat. That's quite a fairly standard sort of resolution. And in fact, it's very charming, that unresolved B flat, that slightly strangely voiced chord. The other thing he notes is, well, I would note here this lovely change here with the C minor sixth to the B flat. So the C minor sixth has some of the same notes as an F7. So this is a little bit like a perfect cadence, because the C minor sixth has much of the quality of an F7th, but it's a very slightly tonally ambiguous chord. It doesn't have an F in it. And again, it gives this feeling of this gentle veiled cadences. And he does point out one of the best bits in the whole tune, which is in the third phrase here. So first of all, this whole passage is lovely. The inner voices here. So this, where the B6 and the B7, the two falling voices to move from B6 to B7, then the C minor with the E flat, and that little falling voice bringing in that rather poignant major seventh. Then we get a really nice passage, and this is the chord he doesn't like. In modern chord theory, we would call this a C augmented. Technically, it's not a C augmented because the note that has augmented here is in the A chord. It's the fifth of the A. But augmented chords are just a kind of a harmonically ambiguous chord, and they deliberately so. And he does this, but in fact what's happening here is there's a lovely falling passage to the F minor over a set of chords that don't quite match that, and it gives you this beautiful little clash of harmonies. Mozart did a lot of this as well, where your accompaniment and your harmonized melody clash slightly in a very gorgeous way. And then this last passage is very settled and very slowly resolves to the E flat. The whole thing is full of very gentle tension and gentle resolution. It's really a beautiful piece. In some respects, I think of this piece of music as rather jazzy, and there's one more chord that I really like, which he also points out. He says, in bar 13, a strain commencing on a discord, and this is the discord here. So it's a B flat 7 with an A flat, so that's a seventh with the 7 in the bass, so the seventh in the bass, and but it's not a striking or ugly discord. It's just slightly uncomfortable discord. Not even uncomfortable, slightly unsettling. There's an undertone of sorrow and little hints of pain in this piece, and that one there is beautiful. So yes, it doesn't begin on a pure consonance. It begins on a slightly dissonant chord in a beautiful way, and then gently resolves with this lovely sixth here. And this is what they would have called a B flat 6/4. So B flat with E flat over it, or E flat with B flat in the bass. They would have called that a B flat 6/4. Anyway, a lovely piece. The dissonances are really one of the best things about this. And they're such gentle dissonances. It's a beautiful hymn. Praise be to God.